Sister Bernice?
I simply cannot find her.
Maria?
She's missing from the Abbey again.
Perhaps we should have put a cowbell around her neck.
Have you tried the barn?
I have looked everywhere, in all of the usual places.
I suggest you look in someplace unusual.
You think you know the sound of music. You've seen it 100 times, maybe more. You know every note of my favorite things, every spin of Maria's dress, every moment of Christopher Plummer's stoic charm. But what you've never known, what the filmmakers never wanted you to know, are the secrets buried behind those iconic scenes. The disasters that almost destroyed the production. The conflicts between the stars. The dangerous moments that should have ended in tragedy. And the one scene that almost became completely unwatchable before a happy accident saved it. Today, we're telling the behind-the-scenes story of one of Hollywood's most beloved films, a story that will completely change how you watch it. Let's start with what might be the most shocking secret. You know the gazebo scene, right? The moment when Maria and Captain Von Trapp dance together in that beautiful white gazebo as snow falls around them, creating the most romantic moment in the entire film. It's been the template for every romantic gazebo scene in cinema ever since. But here's what you never knew. That scene was almost completely ruined before the cameras ever rolled. During filming in Salzburg, Austria, the production set up this enormous white gazebo on the grounds where they would shoot one of the movie's most intimate moments. The director, Robert Wise, wanted everything to be perfect for this scene. So they brought in massive lighting equipment, thousands of watts of Hollywood-grade lights to create the perfect atmosphere, the perfect shadows, the perfect romantic glow. But here's where it gets strange. These enormous lights were so powerful, so heavy that when the crew set them up around the gazebo, something unexpected happened. When the lights powered on, they produced this loud, embarrassing mechanical noise. Not a subtle hum. Not something subtle in the background, but a genuine, distracting sound that echoed across the filming location every single time they tried to film the scene. You can imagine what happened next. Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, two of the greatest actors of their generation, tried to film this deeply romantic, emotional moment while this bizarre mechanical sound kept interrupting everything. And they couldn't help it, they kept breaking character. They'd be in the middle of their dance, completely absorbed in the scene, and then that sound would blast, and both of them would lose it. They'd start laughing. They'd fall out of character. Take after take after take would be ruined because of this ridiculous lighting problem that no one had anticipated. Here's the twist that nobody expected. After numerous failed attempts, Robert Wise realized that he couldn't fix the sound problem in the time they had available. So instead, he made a creative decision that would accidentally create movie magic. He decided to film the couple largely in silhouette, shooting them against a lighter background so their faces and bodies would be darkened, outlined against the gazebo walls and the snow. He did this partly because the silhouette would hide some of the awkwardness created by all the broken takes, but mostly because he had no other choice. It was a desperation move, a compromise born from production disaster. But something miraculous happened. When audiences saw the finished scene, they didn't see a compromise. They saw something even more beautiful than what Robert Wise had originally imagined. The silhouette created an ethereal, dreamy, almost magical quality that made the moment feel more romantic than any brightly lit version ever could have been. What was supposed to be a behind-the-scenes disaster accidentally became one of the most visually stunning moments in cinema history. This is the story we're telling today. The Sound of Music is remembered as one of Hollywood's greatest achievements, a film that seems to have been created effortlessly, a production that looked perfect from start to finish. But the reality behind those perfect images was a production filled with financial desperation, casting conflicts, actor unhappiness, dangerous filming conditions, and moments that easily could have ended in tragedy. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. The story of The Sound of Music actually starts long before Hollywood, long before Julie Andrews, long before the iconic film that won Academy Awards and became a cultural phenomenon. It starts with a real woman, Maria Kuchera, an Austrian woman who lived through one of the most turbulent periods in European history. Maria came from a musical family in Austria. She trained as a governess and eventually joined the Von Trapp household as a tutor for the captain's children. The captain, George Von Trapp, was a naval officer who had lost his first wife and was raising a large family. Maria married the captain, and together they lived through the Nazi occupation of Austria during World War II. After the war, the family struggled to survive in occupied Austria, and eventually they fled to America, seeking refuge and a new beginning. It's a remarkable true story of survival, family, and music during one of history's darkest periods. Maria von Trapp eventually wrote her memoir, sharing her extraordinary life story. The book found an audience. People were fascinated by this real family, their musical abilities, their escape during the war, their reinvention in America. In 1956, a German film called The Trapp Family was released, based loosely on Maria's story. It was successful, which caught the attention of Hollywood producers. But what really mattered was that Vincent J. Donahue, a director and producer, saw something special in this story. He saw potential not just as a film, but as a stage musical. Donahue bought the rights to produce The Sound of Music as a Broadway stage production. He brought in two legendary composers, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein, the team behind some of the greatest musicals in American history. Rodgers and Hammerstein created a new musical based on the Von Trapp family story, and it premiered on Broadway in November 1959. The show was an enormous success. It won multiple Tony Awards. It became one of the most beloved stage musicals ever created. But here's where the real story gets interesting. Here's where the financial desperation begins. 20th Century Fox, the major Hollywood studio, saw the success of The Sound of Music on Broadway and decided they wanted to make it into a film. They purchased the movie rights to the stage production. But this wasn't a decision made by a studio in its prime. 20th Century Fox was actually struggling financially. The studio had spent enormous amounts of money on films that had failed at the box office. Major productions had lost millions of dollars. The studio was desperate for a hit, a major success that could restore its financial health and its reputation. So here's the decision that changed everything. Here's where the risk becomes genuine. 20th Century Fox decided to make The Sound of Music into an enormous, expensive film. They would use Panavision, a widescreen filming technique that was extremely expensive at the time. They would film on location in Austria. They would hire major Hollywood stars. They would create a big-budget production that would cost tens of millions of dollars, money that Fox could not really afford to lose if the film failed. This was a gamble, a massive, studio-threatening gamble. If The Sound of Music failed at the box office, 20th Century Fox might not survive. But if it succeeded, if audiences embraced this musical about a former nun, an aristocratic Navy captain, his 7 children, and their escape from Nazi-occupied Austria, then the studio might be saved. Now that Fox had committed to making this expensive film, they faced a massive problem. They needed to cast the 2 main roles, Maria von Trapp and Captain Von Trapp. And they needed actors who could not only act, but who could sing and dance at a professional level. This wasn't going to be easy. This was going to be one of the most consequential casting decisions in Hollywood history, and things were about to get complicated. Let's start with Julie Andrews, the actress who would eventually become the face of The Sound of Music. But here's the thing, Julie Andrews was not the obvious choice. In fact, she was almost an unlikely choice when you look at where her career was in the early 1960s. Julie Andrews was actually born in England. She grew up in a theatrical family and became a major stage star in London's West End. She performed in musicals, she studied ballet, she trained as a classical singer. She had tremendous talent, but she wasn't known in America. She wasn't a major Hollywood star yet. But then something happened that changed everything. The Broadway production of My Fair Lady was being adapted into a film by major Hollywood producer Jack L. Warner. The role of Eliza Doolittle was one of the most sought-after parts in Hollywood. Every actress wanted this role. It was in a musical written by the same team that created The Sound of Music, Rodgers and Hammerstein's collaborators, Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loewy. Playing Eliza Doolittle would make any actress a star. Julie Andrews had played Eliza on stage in the original Broadway production of My Fair Lady. She had created the role. She had performed it hundreds of times. She knew every note, every movement, every emotional beat. Everyone assumed that when Jack L. Warner cast the film version, he would cast Julie Andrews. It seemed inevitable. It seemed obvious. But Warner made a shocking decision. He cast Audrey Hepburn, an established Hollywood star, in the role instead. He didn't cast Julie Andrews. He didn't even seriously consider her. This was a massive rejection. Julie Andrews was devastated. She had created the role. She had made it famous on stage. And now, she was being replaced by someone with more commercial appeal and more name recognition in films. For a moment, it seemed like her film career might never happen. But here's where things get interesting, because sometimes rejection is actually the beginning of something bigger. Around the same time, Walt Disney was developing a film based on the P.L. Travers children's book Mary Poppins. Disney had been trying to adapt Mary Poppins for years, and P.L. Travers had been resistant to giving him the rights. But eventually a deal was made. Disney needed an actress to play the magical nanny Mary Poppins, and he hired Julie Andrews. Mary Poppins came out in 1964. It became one of the most successful films of the year. Julie Andrews' performance was brilliant. She was charming, mysterious, talented, and absolutely captivated audiences. Mary Poppins won multiple Academy Awards. It made Julie Andrews a major Hollywood star. Suddenly, Julie Andrews was the most sought-after actress in Hollywood. The woman who had been rejected for My Fair Lady was now one of the biggest names in entertainment. This is where Fox came in. They were casting The Sound of Music, and suddenly Julie Andrews was available. She was hot. She was talented. She could sing. She could dance. She was perfect for the role of Maria Von Trapp. The rejection from My Fair Lady, the film nobody expected to matter, had created the circumstances for her to become a legend in The Sound of Music. It's one of those ironic twists that proves that sometimes getting rejected is actually the universe pushing you towards something bigger. But casting the male lead, Captain Von Trapp, was a completely different story. This is where the trouble starts. The role of Captain Von Trapp was offered to several major Hollywood stars. Jack L. Warner wanted to cast Frank Sinatra. Can you imagine Frank Sinatra as Captain Von Trapp? The chairman of Fox had other ideas. Multiple big names were considered, but eventually Fox made their choice. They hired Christopher Plummer, a brilliant actor and singer from Canada who had performed extensively on stage and was known for serious dramatic roles. Here's the problem. Christopher Plummer was not happy about this role. He did not want to be in The Sound of Music. He found the story overly sentimental. He thought the material was too soft, too sweet, too romantic. He was concerned that playing Captain Von Trapp would ruin his reputation as a serious dramatic actor. He signed on to the production, but reluctantly, and his reluctance would become a serious problem during filming. While Julie Andrews was bringing enthusiasm and professionalism to the production, Christopher Plummer was struggling. He was unhappy with the script. He was unhappy with the singing requirements. He was unhappy with director Robert Wise. During production, Plummer began drinking heavily on set, a coping mechanism for his unhappiness with the entire project. His colleagues noticed. The crew noticed. But filming continued anyway. What makes this even stranger is that Plummer's voice wasn't even featured in much of the final film. The producers decided that another singer, Bill Lee, would provide much of Plummer's singing voice in the finished film. So Christopher Plummer was forced to perform in a role he hated, while someone else got to sing his most iconic musical moments. You can imagine how that would make an actor feel, especially someone who prided himself on his talent and his professionalism. But the casting issues went beyond just the two main stars. The production faced challenges finding the right young actors to play the Von Trapp children. Multiple famous child actors auditioned for roles in the film. Some of the children who missed out on parts in The Sound of Music would later become major stars themselves. Imagine being a young actor auditioning for a role in what would become one of the most beloved films of all time, and then being rejected. Some of those child actors would go on to successful careers, but they would always wonder what might have happened if they had gotten cast in The Sound of Music. The children who were eventually selected for the film, including the young actress playing Gretel, the youngest Von Trapp daughter, had their own challenges ahead of them. They would face difficult filming conditions, dangerous sequences, and moments that would push them to the edge of their abilities as young performers. By the time filming began, Fox had assembled a cast that should have been perfect. Julie Andrews, one of the most talented actresses in Hollywood. Christopher Plummer, an accomplished stage actor and singer. 7 young performers playing the Von Trapp children. A legendary director in Robert Wise. Everything seemed ready. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen during production in Austria. When production began in Salzburg, Austria, everyone understood the scale of what they were attempting. They were filming a major Hollywood musical on location in a foreign country. They had a tight schedule. They had a massive budget that Fox could not afford to lose. They had an unhappy lead actor who was already drinking on set. But what nobody anticipated was just how dangerous filming would actually become. The weather in Salzburg became the first major problem. The production had scheduled their Austrian location shoots for a specific time of year when the weather was supposed to be predictable and pleasant. But nature had other plans. Heavy rains began to fall, persistent rains that continued day after day, preventing the crew from filming the outdoor scenes they needed. Scheduling became chaotic. Scenes that were planned for specific days had to be delayed. Actors stood around waiting for weather that refused to cooperate. The budget started to swell as production delays meant more days on location, more hotel expenses, more food, more crew wages. Every day of rain was costing Fox thousands of dollars. But the weather delays were just the beginning. The real danger came when filming the opening sequence of the film, the iconic shot of Maria spinning on the Austrian hillside as she sings The Sound of Music. To capture this scene, the production team decided to film from a helicopter. They wanted an aerial shot that would show the vastness of a landscape, Maria in the center of these beautiful mountains, the camera pulling back to reveal the scope of the Austrian countryside. It was an ambitious choice for 1964 when aerial filming techniques were still relatively new and untested. The helicopter was positioned to capture the opening shot. Julie Andrews was positioned on the hillside, and the helicopter began its run. But here's where things went very wrong. The helicopter's rotor blades created enormous amounts of wind turbulence, wind so powerful that it repeatedly knocked Julie Andrews down onto the ground. She would stand up, and the helicopter would make another pass, and the turbulence would knock her down again. This happened multiple times, over and over. Julie Andrews was being physically knocked down by the force of the helicopter wind, but she kept getting back up. She kept trying the shot again and again because the production needed this opening sequence, and there was no other way to get it. Think about what this means. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was a dangerous situation. Helicopter wind that's strong enough to repeatedly knock down an adult is genuine wind shear, genuine turbulence that could cause serious injury. Julie Andrews could have been badly hurt. She could have suffered a concussion. She could have broken bones. She could have been blown into rocks or trees. But she continued filming the shots because that's what the production required. That's what a major Hollywood production demanded of its star. When you watch that opening sequence in the final film, when you see Julie Andrews spinning and twirling on that hillside with such grace and beauty, you're not seeing an effortless moment of magic. You're seeing a performer who was physically knocked down by a helicopter, who got back up multiple times, and who delivered a perfect performance despite the dangerous conditions. That's the scene nobody was supposed to talk about, the danger hidden behind the beauty of the final product. But Julie Andrews wasn't the only person in danger during filming. The production also needed to film the boat scene, the moment when Captain Von Trapp takes the children on a rowboat across the lake. This scene required the young actors, including the child playing Gretel, to actually be in a boat on the water. The production filmed this sequence with limited safety equipment and precautions that would be considered inadequate by modern standards. During filming of the boat scene, something terrifying happened. The young actress playing Gretel, the youngest Von Trapp daughter, nearly drowned. She fell into the water during the shoot. Think about that for a moment. A child, during filming, fell into the water and nearly died. The crew managed to pull her out, and she survived, but this was a moment of genuine peril that came close to ending in tragedy. What was a child doing in water without proper safety precautions? Why wasn't she in a life vest? Why wasn't there a safety diver standing by? The answer is that filmmaking standards in 1964 were dramatically different from today. Safety regulations were minimal. Insurance was minimal. The focus was on getting the shot, completing the production, and bringing the film in on budget. The child's safety, while important, was secondary to these production goals. After she was rescued from the water, the child continued working. Filming continued. The production couldn't afford to shut down because of a near drowning. The schedule was too tight. The budget was too fragile. Fox needed this film to be completed and released on time. So a child who had just nearly died was dried off, changed into fresh clothes, and put back in front of the cameras. As production continued through the Austrian location shoot, the problems piled up. The rain delays continued. Christopher Plummer's drinking worsened. The crew was exhausted from the difficult conditions and the constant pressure to get shots completed. The young actors were dealing with long filming days, complex choreography, and dangerous conditions. But Robert Wise, the director, pushed forward. The production had to be completed. The film had to be made, no matter what. What makes this even more remarkable is that none of this danger, none of this struggle, none of this difficulty is visible in the finished film. When you watch The Sound of Music, it looks effortless. It looks magical. The opening sequence looks like a beautiful moment of joy and freedom. The boat scene looks charming and sweet. The performances look natural and easy. You would never know that Julie Andrews was being knocked down by helicopter wind. You would never know that a child nearly drowned. You would never know that the lead actor was drinking heavily on set. You would never know that the production was held together by desperation and determination despite constant problems and genuine danger. This is the secret that the filmmakers didn't want you to know. This is the story behind the beautiful images. One of Hollywood's most beloved films was made through suffering, risk, and moments that could have ended in genuine tragedy. And then those moments were edited out, hidden, buried beneath the magic of the final product. The beautiful film you love was born from a danger that nobody was supposed to talk about. But the worst was still to come. Because by the time filming returned from Salzburg, the production faced its biggest challenge yet. The film was complete, the scenes were shot, the footage existed. But something was terribly wrong with one of the most important moments in the entire movie. We began this story with a mystery, and now it's time to return to that mystery and finally explain what really happened in the gazebo. Because the gazebo scene was supposed to be a masterpiece, an intimate, romantic moment that would define the entire film. Instead, it almost became a catastrophe that could have ruined everything. Robert Wise needed to film the scene where Maria and Captain Von Trapp danced together in the gazebo. This was the emotional climax of their relationship, the moment when they finally allowed themselves to fall in love despite all the obstacles between them. This scene required perfect lighting, perfect choreography, perfect chemistry between the two actors. So Wise and his team brought in enormous studio lights, heavy equipment designed to create the most romantic, beautiful lighting imaginable. But when they powered up those massive lights, something immediately went wrong. The lights were so large, so powerful, that they produced a loud mechanical noise every single time they turned on. Not a subtle hum in the background, but a genuine sound that filled the entire area where they were filming. When Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer tried to perform a scene, the noise would blast, and both actors would lose concentration. They would break character and laugh. Take after take would fail because of this ridiculous lighting problem. Imagine being one of the greatest actors in Hollywood, trying to deliver one of the most important emotional moments of your career, and being constantly interrupted by a loud mechanical sound from the lighting equipment. Imagine doing this dozens of times, over and over, your concentration broken again and again. This is what Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer endured during the gazebo shoot. What made this even worse was the dynamic between the two actors. Julie Andrews was professional and committed to getting the scene right. Christopher Plummer, still unhappy with the entire production, was irritated and frustrated. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to film this sentimental scene. And now he was stuck filming take after take that kept failing because of technical problems. His frustration grew with each failed attempt. Robert Wise faced an impossible choice. He couldn't fix the lighting noise in the time available. The production schedule was already falling behind because of the rain delays in Austria. Fox was already worried about the budget. He couldn't stop filming to rebuild the lighting system. He had to find a solution immediately, or the gazebo scene would never get filmed. So Wise made a decision born from desperation. He told the lighting crew to position the lights differently, to shoot the couple largely in silhouette against the lighter background of the gazebo. This wouldn't be the bright, clearly lit romantic scene he had originally envisioned. The faces of Andrews and Plummer would be darkened, shadowed, outlined against the background. But at least the silhouette would hide some of the awkwardness from all the failed takes. At least it would create something acceptable from this disaster. What happened next was pure magic. When Wise filmed the scene in silhouette, something extraordinary occurred. The darkness created an ethereal quality, a dreamlike atmosphere that made the moment feel even more romantic than a brightly lit version would have been. The silhouette created mystery, poetry, beauty. What was supposed to be a compromise, a desperate solution to a technical problem, accidentally created one of the most stunning moments in cinema history. This is the secret of the gazebo scene. It was born from failure. It was created by accident. One of the most beloved romantic moments in movie history happened because the original plan fell apart and Robert Wise made the best choice he could in a bad situation. And that choice, that accidental decision, created something more beautiful than anyone had planned. But the problems continued. There was still the matter of the Edelweiss scene, the moment when Captain Von Trapp sings the Austrian folk song that represents his love for his homeland and his family. This scene required Christopher Plummer to deliver an emotionally powerful performance, to sing the song with genuine feeling and tenderness. The scene is beautiful. It's one of the most touching moments in the film. Here's what you were never supposed to know. During the filming of the Edelweiss scene, Christopher Plummer was drunk. He had been drinking on set throughout production, and during this crucial emotional scene, he was not sober. And yet, he delivered one of the most moving performances of his career. His voice conveyed genuine emotion. His face showed real vulnerability. He created a moment of beauty while under the influence of alcohol. This is the irony that defines his performance in this film. Christopher Plummer, who hated this role, who thought it was too sentimental, who was unhappy with the entire project, delivered one of the most beautiful and emotionally authentic performances in the film while he was intoxicated. The voice you hear singing Edelweiss isn't entirely his, since Bill Lee dubbed much of his singing, but the emotion in his performance was real. The pain of someone who didn't want to be there, the frustration of an actor forced into a role he despised, somehow transformed into genuine artistic power. When you watch The Sound of Music today, when you see that gazebo scene bathed in romantic silhouette, when you hear Christopher Plummer sing Edelweiss with such moving tenderness, you're not watching effortless beauty. You're watching one of cinema's greatest accidental masterpieces, created from technical disaster and personal struggle. And then something remarkable happened. Despite all the problems, despite the rain delays, despite the helicopter turbulence, despite the near drowning, despite the unhappy lead actor, despite the gazebo lighting disaster, the film was finally completed. It was released in March 1965, and audiences fell in love with it instantly. The Sound of Music became the highest-grossing film of 1965. It surpassed Gone with the Wind to become the highest-grossing film of all time. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It became a cultural phenomenon that endured for decades. What had started as a financial gamble by a desperate studio, what had been made through danger and suffering and technical disasters, became one of Hollywood's greatest successes. The film that Fox thought might save the studio didn't just save it, it became a legend. And all those secrets, all those forbidden scenes, all those moments nobody was supposed to talk about, remained hidden behind the beauty of the finished product. If you enjoyed this hidden history of The Sound of Music, be sure to like and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes secrets from your favorite films. Check out the next video for more forbidden Hollywood stories that will completely change how you watch the classics you thought you knew.